Tov, it's good to think I'm seeing you again. We're up to Perek Zayin in Kohelet. So the Perek begins with a pasuk that many of you are very familiar with. Tov Shem Tov Mishemen Tov, V'yom Hamavet Miyom Hivaldo. A good name is better than good oil, and the day of death is better than the day of his birth. It seems to be a very strange comparison. Why compare a good name to good oil? I mean, it sounds like, a good name is better than cream cheese with olives. What's that supposed to mean? So there are various approaches to it. The simplest approach is that the Shemen Tov, the good oil that's being referred to here, is the oil that they would use in anointing. So there are capacities that within the Jewish people, being a king, being a Kohen, that even not only with people, but even actually with the appointed tent in the desert and all of the vessels therein, that the way that they were sanctified was through outpouring oil. So when a person is born into a high position, what does that actually mean? It means that their starting point is different than somebody else's starting point. When a person isn't even born into it, but comes into it on his own, because remember, the king who's the son of a king, a Kohen who's the son of a Kohen, is in a different position than the very first one. That also means from now on, their starting point is different. It's as though they're reborn. But wherever a person starts, and however sanctified their beginning point is, whether it's a beginning point that they entered in the midst of their life, or whether it's a beginning point that they entered at the beginning of their life, that's not what's important in terms of their ultimate judgment. What's important in terms of their ultimate judgment is where they end up. So because of this, there's a comparison that's made in the Midrash, and Rashi brings this as well. Let's look at two people. Let's look at Avraham, who started with nothing. And let's look at the tzaddikim who started somewhere. Was he worse? So in answering that question, another comparison is made. Most of you have heard the story of Mishael, Hananiah, Azariah. Who were they? They were the three young men who in Daniel's time, when the king of the time, Nebuchadnezzar, said, "You either bow to me," and he held himself to be a human god, much as the king of Japan did during World War II, by the way. "Either you bow to me or you'll be thrown in a fiery furnace." They allowed themselves to be thrown in, and they survived. So you have a parallel story of Nadav and Avihu. Who were they? Aaron's two sons, who in a moment of religious ecstasy went into the most sanctified part of the appointed tent to offer incense without the appropriate preparations, without anything, with just themselves, and they were consumed by a fire sent by God. They were drunk with holiness, but they died. They weren't miraculously saved the way Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were. So what that shows you is that a person who develops their madrega on their own, but does it fully, ends up better than somebody whose beginning point, a Kohen ben Kohen, but who doesn't complete it and who doesn't put themselves to the same degree under God's authority. Their last day is different. Okay, so let's go on. Next, the Pesukim in this Perek, by the way, are very much on this theme. Tov lalechet el bet ha'evel, milechet el bet ha'mishteh. It's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. Ba'asher hu sov kol ha'adam, because that's the end of all man. V'chai yiten al libo, and those who live shall give this to their heart. What does that mean? If you compare the effect upon a person of going to a party or going to a shiva house, it's certainly more enjoyable to go to a party. There's companionship, there's warmth, there's camaraderie, there's ambience, and there's food. But you gain more when you go to the house of mourning, because what happens in the house of mourning? Nowadays, oftentimes, the house of mourning, because people are in such great emotional denial about the nature of death, and also because we are prisoners of social conventions, Today, sometimes a house of mourning feels like a party. But when people are more real, a house of mourning feels like a house of mourning. What's spoken about? Why the person who's gone? Why that person's loss will be felt? What did they do? Who were they to you? You learn more about what life is for there than you'll ever learn in a party. I've just come from one of, from an awful. All levayas are awful in a certain sense, but this particular one was particularly so. It was the levaya of the couple who were killed in Mumbai, the Holtzbergs, and there's so much to be learned at that levaya. Being at that levaya was, like there are people who live in the world together with us who really in a serious way try to imitate Avram Avinu, who